did Wix or Squarespace put designers out of business? It didn't. It just created more people who had a website. And at a certain point, the base level of websites requires more designers. It requires more people to kind of come in and raise the standard. I think we're going to see a similar dynamic with copywriting.
Welcome to Punchy by Rival, where we take the gloves off to share the hard-hitting realities of the challenger marketing world. Each week, we'll break down the buzz and cut through the BS of the top stories and trends to tell you what you really need to know and do differently to grow your brand and career. All right, welcome to another edition of what may or may not be Punchy. We're figuring out whether or not we want to do a new content series that's based on questions that we get from you, our audience, and our marketing community that we then answer. It might be part of Punchy. It might not be part of Punchy. We're going to put this out as part of Punchy next week. Would love to hear your feedback on the new concept, on the questions, of course, and as always, would always love to hear from you. So we're going to get into it. We got a set of questions that we've gotten from our posts on LinkedIn and from our Rival AMP community that Jenna Dubose and maybe I will wade in to try to help answer. So first one, a lot of conversations, a lot of talk, a lot of questions actually in this prompt that we put out around AI. ChatGPT, we've talked about the new technology, what it means for the industry in the past, but we have a couple specific questions that we're going to start with on this topic. So the first is broadly, what does AI mean for marketers? And then specifically, is Google dead? Probably not, but what does this actually mean to the changing landscape of SEO and SEM? So Jenna, why don't we actually start there and then work a little bit more backwards? What does AI, conversational AI, mean for SEO, SEM marketers thinking about that right now?
Probably should have thought about this like more or beforehand. Although, I've obviously thought about this a lot, right? Like everybody has. Um, it's honestly, it's so early to tell. Like, obviously, search engines are looking to integrate these tools into their results and other capabilities, which makes a lot of sense, right? Like the original innovation that made Google the preferred search engine of the world was actually their ability to manage large amounts of data into usable information better than like what Dubose year old, than like was it like Netscape or some of the other like search engines that existed like before Google? I don't know any of the other ones because I was barely alive. But it was like that Google used map reduce functionality in order to deal with large amounts of information better than other search engines. And so obviously the integration of, AI and really, what are machine learning tools to deal with large data sets and to make, information more usable will represent a significant competitive edge into whichever search engine or, any search landscape, whether that's like TikTok or YouTube or kind of wherever else that can do those things faster. And it will probably just continue the ever escalating arms race of gaming the algorithms that is, functionally SEM and SEO. I have to say, I think that it probably represents, hopefully a lot, better opportunity for consumers where I think a lot of search results these days have been, gamed to such an extent by SEO marketers that a lot of times, search results frankly aren't usable for people now. And so hopefully that this, leap forward represents an improvement in conditions for people that are actually searching. Otherwise, I just think it's too early to tell. I think that for a little while, this is going to be a really significant acceleration of the tactics that already exist within SEM and SEO, but then probably over the next 12 to 18 months, entirely new uses and like kind of a little bit of a shift and probably like some kind of breaking is going to occur into what happens. But it's still so early on into the integration of AI into Bing and Google that it's a little tough to say.
So Dubose, if you have anything to build, would love to hear it. But also we had another question that I think fits nicely within this, which was, will AI actually displace marketing jobs? If I'm into content and copywriting right now, do I need to be worried?
So I think to the second question, it's interesting because when we consider something like did Wix or Squarespace put designers out of business? It didn't. It just created more people who had a website. And at a certain point, the base level of websites requires more designers. It requires more people to kind of come in and raise the standard. I think we're going to see a similar dynamic with copywriting. At the end of the day, copywriting, content creation, all of these things, there is a level of craft that separates good from great. I think the AI is just raising the floor of how people get to good, but I think talented copywriters, talented creators are always going to be the ones that can take a good idea and make it great. They can put a better spin on it. We're just democratizing the base level of insight here. There was a strategist on LinkedIn that was saying one of the interesting things they use ChatGPT for is actually looking at just what are the standard ideas, what are the cliches that can come across from a strategy, feeding the strategy into it and going, okay, these are the obvious things that someone would get to. Now, do I need to go further? Do I need to change things? And I think for me, that's where a lot of the value is going to come. How do you push beyond the obvious? How do you push and sharpen the things that are very clear on first pass? And like any creative process, it's an iterative thing. The idea of an epiphany doesn't really exist. Nothing comes out fully formed. Instead, you're iterating on something, you're building on it, you're improving it. We're just getting to those later stages of iteration faster. And if you're good at that process, you should be really happy with what's coming.
Let's move on. Next question, shifting gears slightly. How much or what percentage of your marketing budget do you need to allocate towards branding? Of course, it depends on the industry, but what's a good rule of thumb, Dubose?
So I think this question is one that comes up often. And I think one of the things I've always found is first you need to define what you mean by branding. I think at the end of the day, we take quite a wide definition of brand. Brand is anything a consumer interacts with in a way that's going to build perception, build attitude, shift kind of the way people behave. Now, obviously, you need some distinction between that and performance, the things that are much more direct response. But I think at the end of the day, you should approach your comms as everything has a fuse. How long is that fuse? At the end of the day, brand is one of those things that is going to build perception, put cash in the bank, allow you to change behavior more easily. And then obviously, lower funnel kind of direct response perception is a smaller fuse trying to drive behavior change. I think it's going to change for every sector. Obviously, there have been studies that say things like 60-40 when it was kind of, I think the Binet and Fields kind of chart that's been bandied about for years. But I think one of the things I would say is start with what's the behavior you're trying to change. Start with what are the problems you're facing within the market. And I think considering what quote unquote brand comms do and the problems they solve and what problems kind of, nudging someone right now with kind of latent demand where they just need to know where to go, that kind of direct response comms, what that solves. Understanding that and the proportion of those challenges facing your business is going to be the best rule of thumb to understand how to allocate. I think, coming with a hard and fast number really ignores the idea that you can take creative and novel approaches to branding and change that proportion wildly. You can take creative or novel approaches to kind of performance or direct response and change that number wildly. So I think, teenagers and fascists simplify things too much. And I think now I'll add marketers to that because I think at a certain point, it's very hard to just have a hard and fast split on brand versus performance.
Jen, I want to get your thoughts on this as well. Maybe coming at it from more of a media planner, buyer standpoint, because I don't know how this person intended the question. If it was more kind of overall, like, hey, I'm a CMO, or hey, I'm planning for our marketing budget for the company. But from a media planning and buying perspective, you've obviously planned and bought, I don't know the number, maybe you do billions of dollars of media. And so you've had to think within those campaigns, how much do you allocate towards top of the funnel and brand, and how much do you allocate towards conversion, bottom of the funnel? Again, of course, it differs by industry and business, but what can you share from your experience?
I wish it was billions. I think it's only $500 million. Yeah,
That's still pretty good.
that's pretty good. Yeah. Um, yeah, I do, of course, agree with everything that you both said about like the complexity of this and, of course, all the caveats. Yeah, I like the 60-40 rule of thumb. There is a time and a place for you got to start somewhere and you do have to assign numbers to these things. And 60-40, I think that it's relatively rare that clients will agree to that kind of split. So that's when, from a planning perspective, you have to get a little bit creative about your classification, in particular in like the mid funnel for like your consideration media, where it's like you can kind of, bullshit your way through like what gets designated as like performance or like retargeting and like what's, brand or whatever else. I'm kind of hoping that like guess you can call it a resurgence, right? Like, everything from the 80s is cool again for Gen Z. I guess it's also cool again for marketers that like MMMs are like back in a really like big way. I think will hopefully like bring, the nice thing about MMMs is that like they're fundamentally grounded in the reality of buying and purchase decisions are complicated, complex processes that are made up of many, many inputs. And the relatively arbitrary distinction between brand and media, again, while it is necessary, again, for the simple budgeting process for kind of whatever else, is not necessarily the best way to think about it. And it is again, much more important to think about it as a series of inputs that will do a series of jobs kind of deal. But yeah, I like the 60-40 rule, partially because of the Bennett and Fields job. But again, also just because I think that probably ends up representing pretty well your brand impressions should generally be, significantly cheaper, but you need way, way more of them because the job to be done around, kind of awareness, unaided awareness, aided awareness, those types of things, those are mass impression, lifts, mass impression jobs to be done. And the types of things about, actual kind of, direct response, being people to kind of buy now, a significantly smaller percentage of people will do that, but it will tend to be a little bit more expensive. And so generally that 60-40 ratio tends to work out pretty well for the relative costs and like, percentage and size of your respective audiences at those general stages from a media buying perspective.
Dubose, what is the value of long-term loyalty to a brand?
So, loyalty is an interesting topic in that depending on who you speak to, some people think it's incredibly important. There are other theorists out there, if you subscribe to things like How Brands Grow, where they say loyalty doesn't really exist. Really, what you're doing is constantly refreshing kind of your pool of customers and constantly trying to fight off people who would be quite transitory to deals or promotion. I tend to sit somewhere in the middle. I think if you think loyalty is dead, then you tend to think advertising has no persuasive capacity. Whereas I think if you think customers are incredibly loyal, you're also one of those people who kind of thinks that someone wants to have a conversation with your pickle brand. And I think we have to be realistic, but I think we can be hopeful. There's, at the end of the day, a value to providing a good service. There's a value to providing something people want to come back to. And there's a value for shutting down consideration. People are busy. They don't want to have to go through a grocery store and think, active consideration of every brand they've ever dealt with. So I think to that point, there is a value to loyalty because you are, at the end of the day, a relationship is probably not the right word. A relationship is something you have with a person. It's something you have with something you deeply care about. There are very few brands that attain that level of engagement. But I think there is a sense of, I know this works. I know this is done well for me. I know they align with whatever I'm looking for. You have simplified my shopping journey. You've simplified my consideration. You've simplified my relationship with brands, services, providers, those types of things. So I think the value in long-term loyalty is A, giving you a head start. I think if you rest on your laurels and stop providing a value, stop keeping up with the market, at a certain point that loyalty is squandered. But you really do get, in a way, a first mover advantage. There's the idea that you'll be more likely to be received messaging wise, you're more likely to be considered, and you're more likely to get the first at bat. Now, if you flub that enough, or if there's too much of a premium disparity, you are starting to increase the probability that that loyalty erodes.
Jenna, having just run an agency search process, albeit not for a startup per se, but I think you'll have a fresh perspective on this question. What should a marketer look for in an agency when hiring if they are in a startup and budget constrained?
This is such a corny answer, I feel like, but it's the people, right? Like, I think we talk about this largely related to tech a lot of the time. Because the barriers to entry for marketing jobs are so unfortunately low, and literally anybody can wander in off the street and get a job in marketing. I think it's really difficult to have truly like unique selling propositions as an agency, truly like non-replicable features for your tech, like really like things that are your own kind of space that are genuinely better than other agencies. And the only exception to this is the capabilities and the intelligence of the people that are staffed at that agency. That is the only distinction and differentiation that truly exists between any agency, is the IP and the thinking of the people that exist in it. We work in a service business. No matter how much you want to talk about productized tech or services or whatever, at the end of the day, it is literally just about the brains of the people that are employed at that place, which is why things like attrition and retention are so important there. And I think that, again, like, you know, and one of the things that we really focused on in this agency search that I ran is like, it's one thing if you've got really smart people at the top. Lots of places do that. Like, I used to shit on MediaCom all the time because I think that MediaCom had plenty of perfectly smart people at the top and a bunch of mouth breathers at the bottom of the totem pole. And like, really, when you're a startup and you're looking for an agency, you need to make sure that like the A players at the top have hired A players as juniors, and that they are invested in their success to continue the cycle of, you know, differentiated thinking and IP. Because, you know, no matter what like good ideas or good work or good thinking that your agency comes up with, the constant pace of change relies on the intelligence and capabilities of those juniors and the people actually in the trenches to keep innovating. That's the only answer. There is no other answer. That is it.
No mouth breathers.
No mouth breathers.
All right. Last question, my favorite one. I want to get answers from both of you. If you were the marketing team of Balenciaga, how would you navigate yourself out of the recent scandal of the Balenciaga bondage-bears? I feel like this is kind of like a beauty pageant type situation. I'm like, Dubose, if you were president for the day. Okay, so how would you, if you're CMO of Balenciaga, how do you navigate yourself out of this recent scandal? Dubose, let's start with you.
It's a funny one. I think depending on the sector, there would be a completely different response to this. Given that where Balenciaga sit, I think it's the smoke bomb idea. At the end of the day, you just kind of, you know, acknowledge it for a moment and then walk away like it never happened. It's fashion. Something weirder will happen next week. I think the funny thing about Balenciaga is, you know, how many people have actually bought Balenciaga that are listening to this versus it's just one of those things that exists in the world. Like, I'd love to claim that I have quite a lot of it, but I think, you know, it's definitely not kind of something I think within my social circle, it's got very wide reach. I think at the end of the day, it's a lot of outrage about what was an incredibly dumb, like, series of events. But you're not going to be able to explain that away. And in fact, in a sector where no one can really explain much of what's done. So I think you just kind of go, if we stop talking about it, maybe it will just leave and then just carrying on until the next weird thing happens. I know they can't say that. I think, you know, as CEO, I would probably couch that language in something like, we've handled this issue. It's now a settled issue. We've deeply internalized a value change based around learning from culture and society. And we look forward to providing new and unique experiences that are better than this in the future. Something like that.
Done. The smoke bomb strategy. I like it. Jenna, what would you do?
Just of those two like lawyers, and like one of them like is like smoking cigars and like has like sunglasses on all the time, and it's like they basically they just do like videos of like, you know, like legal advice. Specifically, I think they do it for people that are arrested for pot offenses, for marijuana offenses. But basically, all of their videos like boil down to like, what do you do if a cop asks you da 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 da? Shut the fuck up. Literally all like, what do you do if a cop says blah? Like, what do you do if you're asked it? Shut the fuck up. And like, that's just their advice for like literally any interaction with a cop. Is just shut the fuck up. Balenciaga, shut the fuck up. Don't even like make like the statement, like don't even do like the smoke bomb or whatever. It's just like, just say nothing, pretend it never happened, and move on with your lives. The amount of like unforced errors that I see like brands and like public figures like make about these things. Because then if you put like an apology out, and then there's like, you know, people will nitpick your apology, or like they'll say like, oh, we're trying to educate ourselves. Well, so it's not my job to educate you. Like these types of things, it just devolves into this like hideous maelstrom of like internet discourse. And it's such a classic, like the only way to win is not to play. Just shut the fuck up. Like that's the only thing. You did it. Obviously, Balenciaga has a risk tolerance because they engaged with Kanye, who even before this year was an absolute shit show and very clearly the Russian roulette of influencer and celebrity relationships. They clearly have a risk tolerance for these things. So pretty much, like, all right, you tried, it blew up in your face. You clearly knew that was a possibility when you were playing with fire. So a lot of mixed metaphors about the dangers that they've undertaken here. Like, take the L, shut the fuck up, move on.
There you go. That's all the time that we have for today. Join us next time on New Show Yet to Be Named. Have a good one. Punchy is a production of Rival. We are a growth consultancy that builds challenger brands, strategies, and capabilities to disrupt categories. If you want to learn more about us, check out wearerival.com. If you want to connect with Jenna, Dubose, or myself, email us at media@wearerival.com or find us on LinkedIn. If you enjoyed today's show, please subscribe, share with anyone you think might enjoy it, and leave us a review. Thanks so much for listening, and see you next week.